way. And the only person that can rebuild an engine right now is the manufacturer or an agent of the manufacturer. Right now, there are no agents of the manufacturer, so it's basically the manufacturer. It's another little profit center for the manufacturer, and they sell a whole bunch of these things because you're getting essentially a brand new engine for less money. Essentially a brand new engine for less money. You also get a logbook explaining that. And it's also going to say this engine was rebuilt by Lycoming or Continental or whoever. And this is what's going to show up in that logbook. 0 hours, time since new or since rebuilt. So this engine, what it does is it comes from the factory. When you send a core in, and not your core, what they do is they break the cores down. You put them in a big pile, they magnaflux everything, NDT it, measure it, and anything that's still pretty good or right at new parts, that's going in the pile that they use on these rebuilt engines. Okay, so you'll end up maybe with a camshaft doesn't have much wear on it. Maybe the engine's been extremely well taken care of, so the gut parts in the engine will also be reused. You won't have to reuse pistons, won't use any reciprocating parts, but some of the internal parts, also the hardware, will all be reused. The cases will also be reused. So you're saving a bunch of money buying one of these things. They'll also update them. So any ADs that were current up to the time of rebuild will be complied with. That's not any part of your problem. The company, Lycoming, will take care of that. Okay, so you see the difference here with the new engine versus the rebuild engine. On the rebuild, you've got used parts at new standards. Used parts at new standards. On the new engine, you've got new parts, period. So they cut the cost down just a little bit. And they'll certify them for the same amount of time. They'll still have the same TBO.
So really it saves you like $5 grand?
Saves you some money, yeah. Yeah, people will go for that. Yeah, they don't want a brand new engine. Okay. So if you buy a brand new engine with no core, what are you going to have to pay?
$40K, right?
You don't have a core? What are you going to pay?
$5K.
Yeah,
45.
close to 5K. So people that are building experimentals, or maybe wrecked an airplane, destroyed the cases, maybe they want a brand new engine, it's a low-time airplane, they want to preserve the value of the airplane, and so what they'll do is they'll buy a brand new engine. They can put a rebuilt in there, but it may drop the price of the engine down, the price of the aircraft down just a little bit. Okay. So that's the difference between a rebuilt and a brand new engine. Use some reused parts. The parts will be from the manufacturer. How many know what OEM is? OEM. Okay, it is a term that is used for replacement parts made by somebody else. So, we're going to have, actually it's not. OEM is parts made by the manufacturer. There are other parts available made by other companies that are FAA PMA. Won't have any of those parts in there because Lycoming is standing behind this engine. They don't want to worry about Superior and ECI and some of these other guys that make engine parts. So we'll only have Lycoming parts in it. Lycoming brand new parts and Lycoming used parts. We use Lycoming gasket sets. Everything will be Lycoming in this case on this engine. Okay. OEM means original equipment manufacturer. OEM, you should know that. The FAA PMA parts, there's a whole bunch of manufacturers out there that make FAA PMA parts. So, they are approved by the FAA. To make the parts, they have what is called a parts manufacturing approval. Okay. And so their part, you can take it out of the box and it goes right on. That's just the same as an original part. It's approved by the FAA, uses a replacement part, so long as you use the correct part number. Right? Now, a lot of times if you buy, there's a company out there called Superior, they will use the same part number as Lycoming, but they'll put a prefix letters on it called SL. It'll be SL, which indicates that it's made by Superior. Okay. It's the same part number. pretty simple. Okay, so let's talk about the other engine guy out here. Way over on the right, there's some excellent rebuilders. They do really, really good jobs on these engines. They're probably at least as good as the manufacturer insofar as building engines. You always have these guys out there, these onesie-twosie shops, and some of them are pretty good size. Western Skyways is one, Powered by Victor up in the Bay Area. There's probably 10 or 20 of those shops around. Now, this is not a little shop like you guys here, and I'm not saying you couldn't build an engine like that. Some of you probably could, no sweat. But I'm talking about the big preeminent shops, the really very good shops. These guys are loaded up with tools and equipment. They don't send much of their machining out. They do it in-house, so they have very tight control over what they do. Okay, so that's going to be sitting up there about $35,000. Now, as we work our way back down, we've got some differences here. And I also want you to think, too, that when parts are sold by Lycoming, they have distributors. You don't just buy parts from Lycoming. You can't back up the truck to the door. So they have parts distributors. So they cut those distributors a little bit of a break on the price, so they have some room to make some money. They can discount the parts all they want, but there's still a bottom on the price of those parts because they protect all their distributors, right? So you won't get it any cheaper at one distributor than another. Okay, so you got that. So here's the deal. Now, of course, these guys own the lock on the repair parts. Nobody's going to get them cheaper than these guys. So if you got a widget that probably costs them $20, they're going to put it in there at $20. But that widget over here is going to cost somebody a minimum of $30 because this guy wants to make a little bit of money on a deal. We don't give our time away or our parts away. The profit's too thin in this business. So this guy's going to make 10 bucks on that widget. This guy down here isn't even going to buy that widget. He's going to put the old widget back in there. So let's take a look at this from bottom feeder all the way to the top. So this guy here, and there's a couple of these places in the Southland here, one in this county, they kind of operate on the edge a little bit. They try to do a good job, but their mantra is don't get too excited about stuff, right? We're dealing with aircraft engines here. Okay, so this guy over here can build an engine for $15,000, or we'll say 16, 18, put 18 over here. Okay. Give him a little room to make a little bit of money. He processes the engines through very quickly. He's got mountains of parts. And he'll go through those parts looking at all the serviceable parts. Comes up with a supply of parts that all have pretty much the right part numbers on them. Puts them in a pile. We're going to build this engine. That's this guy here. Now, what happens to the TBO on this engine? Let's say it's just for round numbers, it's a 2,000-hour TBO on this engine. How long is that engine going to last, given that he's using parts that are at serviceable limits? These parts are right there, almost about to wear out. What's that?
200 hours.
2, maybe more. Okay, but the point is, it's not going to make it to the TBO probably. So this person is going to have, whoever buys this thing, is going to have problems down the road. Now the engine may not explode. It's probably not going to explode. These engines are pretty tough. But you have to know you can't put used parts back in place of a new part and expect the same performance out of it over time. Does that make sense? Now, and you got these other guys here. There's 2 or 3 of those guys around the county here and in the LA basin. Build them for about 20, 22, 23, somewhere in there. That's kind of the minimum that you can build an engine for. Kind of the minimum. It doesn't leave you much room for making any money. By the time you figure out your labor, shop time's $85 to $100 an hour. Okay. It's got to pay the lights, the workers' comp. You got to pay insurance. You got all the stuff you got to pay for, and then you got to pay the employee, and it leaves you nothing really, very little left, right? That's just part of doing business in California. So you've got these guys, for 20K, maybe a little more, 22. They're building engines. They're using a lot of parts, but they're also using maybe a few new parts. And if you do that, it's going to cost you some money. Now, there's some things you can use to cut some corners real easily, and that is buying assemblies from the distributors. So if you buy a cylinder assembly from the distributor, so most of you know now how much screwing around you have with a cylinder. Do you agree? A lot of screwing around, a lot of measuring, and you end up with grinding the valve in, and then if you don't have a valve that's going to work, you have to get another one. What'd you guess a exhaust valve costs?
$80.
A little over $80 a piece, right? That's on a standard engine, right? So pretty soon you got 4 of those in an engine. There's $360, and so your profit's starting to shrink little by little because you have enough integrity to put a few new parts in these things. Have you ever read the service bulletin on what you have to replace in the engine, according to Lycoming? There's a lot of little pieces in there. You should read that. Just dig it up, Google it. Okay, so you've got this guy here. So he's using used parts. Used parts. And he's also using a few new parts. Now, he's not going to spend a lot on new parts. The reason for that is when you start spending money on new parts, he's not getting those parts very cheap. He's having to pay whatever his business is. He'll get FBO prices on it. That's about it. Good as he's going to get. It's less than retail, but he's still going to pay a considerable amount of money for these parts. So you start getting up into this stratus here. And this is where you find most of the engines. This is where you find most of the engines in this area right here. And so these are going to be a mixture of brand new parts. You should be writing this down because the overhauled engines have some little differences. You can build an overhauled engine with all brand new parts if you want, but you still have to call it an overhauled engine because you're not the factory. You all see that? Okay. So this guy here is going to use some parts that maybe are new. He's going to use some new parts that are at high standards for wear. That is to say, they'll be serviceable plus very close to new. And you'd be surprised all the parts you can clean out of an engine that still are running at pretty new standards. So this is what you're going to end up spending here is between $24,000 and $35,000 depending on the new parts you put into it. Now if you send all the parts out for machine work, you're going to get that back. It's going to be sitting probably in here somewhere. But some of the processes you can do yourself. So if you have 2 cases that are rubbing against each other and shifting around, you have to send the cases out to have them machined. If you don't have an engine with that problem, you just put the cases back together, or if you're down there on the bottom end, you just put the cases back together anyway. You put some extra sealant in there, close it up, nobody knows the difference. So there's some big differences here in what an overhaul is. And I have to tell you, usually I get some pilots in here and these guys are shopping for an engine and they're looking down around 20,000. Well, why should I pay 20 grand for an engine? Why shouldn't I pay 20 grand for an engine when you're looking at up here, you're looking at the stratosphere? So there are some compelling reasons depending on what your expectations are. So let's say you're going to sell the airplane and the engine's worn out. You think you get a little bit more money for it? Kind of dollar up a little bit. Maybe sell it as a new overhaul on the engine. Which engine are you going to use? Yeah, you're going to use that one down there, right? Yeah. And that guy, he goes down the road. About 4 or 5 years, he gives you a call. You're going to say, man, I don't understand it. You got overhauled that engine. He says so in the logbook. So you have to be careful of this stuff. You kind of look and see who does the work. And I think I think if you read between the lines on what's inside of these engines, and again, when you buy an engine or you have somebody build you an engine, then you should get a bill of materials with it. So you all should be coming up with a bill of materials for your engine. What did you put into it? Now, one of the things that has really made engine rework much easier is buying cylinders instead of reworking the old cylinders, the existing cylinders. So why would we buy new cylinders? Why not, let's put it this way, why wouldn't we reuse the cylinders?
It's got too much deposit on it.
Too much what?
Deposit?
Well, we can clean that out, that's just blasting, that's all it is.
You got scratches on the side if something went out of shape.
No, because you're gonna hone it probably.
So what?
Yeah,
You're already buying enough parts in that cylinder where the total cost of those parts are gonna cost more than what buying a new cylinder would cost. Why would you do
Yeah.
that?
so between your labor and the cost of that cylinder, you're probably right there even. And it saves you a whole lot of work.
Oh,
You take that cylinder right out of the box, there's nothing else to do to it. You pull the piston out with it, it's already got rings on it, you just slap it right on the engine, away you go. $4,000, you got all the cylinder work done. You pull the cylinder off and you rework it, what kind of parts do you have to replace, or should you replace in that cylinder?
The seals,
Seals? Cheap seals, that's no big deal. What else?
rings,
So you're gonna replace the rings, what else?
valves,
Valves, okay,
rebore.
spring.
all of that.
Valve seats.
All of that, yeah, you're gonna be putting a lot of little parts in this thing that you don't have to do when you put a cylinder assembly in there. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, and even if it costs you $100 more, let's say they're $1,100, why would you do it? Save you a lot of time, you can be doing something else, with that time, right? So it saves you time, but also that way the parts get replaced. So the parts that are most heavily loaded in the engine is really up in the top end of the engine. You got the rings, the pistons, you've got the valve, the exhaust valve. Do we need to replace the exhaust valve, or should we replace the exhaust valve? Yeah, so after a while, that exhaust valve begins to crystallize because of the heat. And if it comes off, we all had the borescope out here the other night, you saw what happened when the valve falls off. It's not real pretty. So there's some compelling reasons to replace all of those cylinders on that engine. Now, you can overhaul them. They do overhaul. They overhaul pretty nicely. If you are smart enough to put all new parts into them, right? So the springs usually are good. Cap keepers and all that stuff are usually pretty good. But the exhaust valve, certainly, you want to replace that. You want to check 1,000 things in there and make sure that the valve seat isn't loose. Valve seat gets loose, what happens? Do you see that one cylinder that we had out here the other night? So that valve seat falls off, and then all holy hell breaks loose inside there. So the pistons wear out, the rings wear out. You're probably going to have to go to oversize if the engine has an appreciable time on it. So all these things add up, where it doesn't make any sense to not put new cylinders on. If you're doing it for yourself, it's a whole different deal.
So when you put a new cylinder, you get pistons, valves, and everything?
Yes, yeah, the only thing you don't get is the
Rings.
rocker pin and the wrist pin. Okay, pretty simple. So the overhauled engine down here, what's your logbook gonna say? Your logbook down here is gonna say 0 hours since major overhaul. And then it's gonna have however many hours, I'd say 2,000 hours, total time. Right? That's not gonna be too appetizing when you have these other ones to look at. You don't wanna have to fool around with that. The total time is good as long as you've got good quality parts in the engine. So a lot of engines will be out there 5,000, 10,000 hours, no big deal, as long as the overhauls are good. So there's the short of it right there. There are plenty of guys that overhaul engines like this. Plenty of them. They're out there all over the place, and they tend to deal with older airplanes and customers that don't want to spend any money. So you get that too. Okay. So there you go. So you got a better idea what an overhaul, rebuilt, and in a brand new engine is. Now,
So Lonnie, you look at the logbook, it would say who overhauls it.
oh yeah, it'll say who overhauled it.
So
There'll
you
be a
gotta do
signature
your
in
the
there.
background search and research, make sure
Well,
the
you can
company
check them
does.
out, yeah, sure, you can check them out. Now, a lot of times you find this stuff out after the fact, after the engine's already broken, right? So somebody bought the airplane, airplanes trade pretty consistently. So, so if the airplane trades several times, it's gonna be hard to track them down. And the other thing too is, because they're bottom feeders, they're probably not there anymore. The other part of this is, a lot of these shops, when they close up their doors, they get rid of all their records. You're not required to keep these records someplace, because they just vanish into the wilderness. And when they do, you have no idea what's inside that engine. Right? So you have no idea what's inside that engine. So if an AD comes out and says, you've got an AD note on a crankshaft, part number of such and such crankshaft, how are you gonna find that? You gotta take the engine apart, right? That's not too appetizing, not for most people I know anyway. They're gonna be kind of grouchy about that. So know that when you do get an engine overhauled, you will get it with a rebuilt and a brand new engine. You'll get a bill of materials what's inside that engine. You get every part, nut and bolt that's inside that engine, so you know what's in there. Yeah.
Clean Keller was telling me yesterday that when she overhauled the engine in her Cardinal, there was an AD, like weeks after she got her engine back, there was an AD on
Connecting rod.
connecting rod bushings. And she had no idea because they were only Lycoming connecting rod bushings.
Yes, yeah.
So she called the company and they had used superior bushings.
They had some experience, and the company said, well, they were fitting kind of loose for their taste, and so they went with Superior and put those new bushings in. So you can imagine there's a bushing in the small end of the connecting rod, right? And that's the pivot point for the piston. So all the pressure from the piston pivots about that bushing. So when the rod is pressed in, when the rod gets hot, and the bushing doesn't have the correct fit, where does the bushing go? Tries to migrate both ways or one way out of the connecting rod. When it migrates out of the connecting rod, what happens then? The engine's a live engine, it's in operation. What happens then?
Good little sloppy.
It gets a lot sloppy, yeah. The engine start clanking and banging. So there you are. You have to know that you have to be careful. You have to stay up on this stuff. And there's plenty of publications that tell you about this stuff. Word gets around pretty darn quick. I talked to the Lycoming guy about that back at Oshkosh, and he didn't really want to talk about it, which is understandable,
Well, that's surprising.
because they were still working their way through the AD process. But this stuff gets sorted out. She had a set of cylinders that almost were involved in her Skybolt. We bought brand new cylinders for her engine. That was an engine that was $15,000, but we didn't pay any labor for it because I was there eating burritos helping her put her engine together, right? So it was a cheap deal, right? So there was an AD came out on some cylinders that were made by ECI, which is what she had bought for that engine. Luckily, the part numbers didn't apply to the cylinders that she had for her engine. So you have to kind of keep a heads up and pay attention to this stuff. And what happened is ECI gets their cylinders built by a company in Italy. It's a casting company. They make the cylinders there, and it only missed one audit station, one inspection station, but because of that, they couldn't use the cylinders. Right? These are hundreds of these cylinders. So know that this stuff can happen anytime. It happens to all of them. Lycoming had a deal where they had to take back a bunch of cylinders several years ago, nearly put them out of business. It was something like 35,000 cylinders that missed an audit on an FAA inspection, missed a stamp. So know that it had them down on their knees too for a while. They're all subject to this stuff, but what you do is you keep your eyes open and your ears open and listen to this stuff, so that you kind of have an idea what's going on in the industry. Once you're in the industry, you'll pick this stuff up. Okay, now, let's see what else. What should I tell you? Yeah, like I say, it's going to cost you $15,000 just for the machine work. And in the case of her Skybolt, she had to buy a brand new crankshaft because the other crankshaft was smoked. It was completely smoked. In the cases, they were able to rework those, so she was good there. But a lot of the engine had bad damage to it, had some destroyed connecting rods and the hardware, so it was pretty bad inside. So fixing that stuff, I say 15,000 isn't that bad. You probably think I'm nuts, but 15,000 in the terms of a airplane stuff is not that bad at all. Pretty inexpensive if you do it yourself. So you have no labor involved in it, and I can tell you that you know, you can build an engine pretty quick, but all the painting and decorating and all that stuff, masking and oh, Lonnie, do you think we could mask this here? Sure, we can do that. Pretty soon it turns into hours and hours and hours. So if you're doing this for a living, it's pretty hard to do unless you charge $100 an hour for your time. But you do it for yourself, and you'll see it's pretty easy. You'll see when you start putting these engines back together, it's really fairly easy to reassemble one. You kind of work to the tolerances when you go back together. It's no big deal. Right? Is a engine overhaul something that you have to document on a 337?
Yes.
How many say yes? Raise your hand. You're all being kind of careful here. How many say no? About as many. Yeah. No, you don't have to, and that's because
It's
it
not
is a
major.
replacement of parts for the component.
Yeah, it's not
It's
major.
like changing a tire on a wheel. Well, it's not exactly like that.
What if you
but that's-
change engines out, what if you went to a bigger engine?
Yeah, then you got an STC problem or a 337 issue there. Yeah. So, no, you don't have to, for an overhaul, any mechanic can do an overhaul. Well, not any mechanic, any A&P, appropriately rated mechanic. So if you're a P mechanic, yeah, you can do it. If you're A mechanic, can you do it?
No.
No.
Nope. So we talk about this in the props class too. I have an STC project for them. And I have them pick another prop. Some of you know this. I have them pick a prop for the engine, and we talk about 337s. So in the case of an engine, and you substitute an engine, and it's all documented, you have an STC to change the engine, where does that entry go?
Airframe.
Change engine.
Right. Let me put it this way. You have an engine that you are modifying, where does that document go?
Engine lock.
Engine logbook, okay. Now, if you change the engine, Mr. Winks,
It's the airframe.
goes under the airframe. The engine is a component of the airframe. We got that, it's like a wheel and tire, it's like a rudder, it's like an aileron, it's just a piece of the airplane.
It has its own logbook.
But it has what?
Its own logbook.
It has its own logbook.
Yeah.
And that's because any of the maintenance, because it's considered a complex component, it has a logbook for it that explains what you've done to that part.
So other than engines and props, do any other components have logbooks?
Sure, so you might have a gearbox or transmission. You might have a combustion heater,
Oh.
any of that kind of stuff. Anything that's more complex and more, might cause you some problems, specific problems, and also anything that has a maintenance requirement specifically for it. So you do an annual on a combustion heater, you go in there and you look at the can liner in there, and you look for decay, you pressurize it and all that. But if you replace anything in there, then that goes in both the airframe and the combustion heater logbook. So you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's in that case. So you've got this guy sitting down there at $20,000 for an engine overhaul, and you see his ads. There's a kind of a crap yellow sheet that flies around to the hangar there. It's called Trade-A-Plane. Any of you ever seen it? Trade-A-Plane. It's kind of a gazette and magazine. It's got airplanes for sale in it. The Trade-A-Plane's been around for years and years and years. When you go looking for something, it used to be the place to go to when you look for something. You'd scour the ads looking for an airplane or an engine or any components, any of that kind of stuff. Now there's a online called Barnstormers, which is really pretty good.
Even
So-
the Trade Planes online website.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they charge you to use it.
Barn what?
What is it? Barnstormers.
Barnstormers.com.
Barnstormers.com. Yeah.
Farmers.
Yeah, you'll find them there real easy.
Definitely.
And so when you have these resources at hand, A lot of times people will put ads in there. These engine shops will put an ad in, and the ad will read something like, buy one of our famous extreme rebuilt engines. Now, if you see that in a logbook, when you go up there and you get your engine, you're about to pick it up, you should run. Not slow, but run away quick. Because one, are they allowed to write that in there?
No.
No. They can only write overhauled in there. And they don't want you to know it's, well, they don't want to say it's overhauled because everybody's got overhauled engines. That doesn't differentiate them. So what happens is when you end up getting mixed up with these guys, they have to do something to make them sound better. Now, one of the things that they'll do is paint and finish on the engine, which is okay. Sometimes, though, they can put too much. Powder coat is an issue. How many of you know what powder coat is? A few of you? Okay, so powder coat is a ground up plastic, and it's sprayed or deposited from a positive gun to a negatively charged case. When you mask this thing off, it's kind of like paint. And as long as the charge is on it, the powder will adhere or stick. Now, you're still not done yet, because what you have to do is bake it in an oven, and that melts the powder into a very glossy, highly durable finish. Looks pretty good, actually. Okay. So that's a big thing that people do, and it's used for a price point. So you get your engine overhauled for $20,000, or I can spend another $2,000 and have your whole engine powder coated in the color that you love. I just use pink, but that's just me. Because if you ever get MEK or acetone on it, it burns the surface just like it does with paint. So it's really, you know, some people have super bitchin' little airplanes and they want to show off a little bit. My engine's going to be red. That's going to be cool red. But the point here is you have to be careful with it, careful maintaining it. So so they offer little things like that. One of the other things that they offer is balancing. They will dynamic balance the parts. Now, unless you have an approval by the FAA, and a lot of these overhaul shops are repair stations, a lot are not, unless you have a approval from the FAA, you're not allowed to balance anything, because you have to prove to the FAA and to the manufacturer how you're going to do this. So, so there are some shops out there that have this, and it's a good thing sometimes. And so, so in the props class, I was showing them a balance video the other day. When you balance something, it is in the moment. So if you lose compression in a cylinder, what happens to your balance? Throws it out, right? And this can happen in a fairly quick time. You burn a valve, what happens? Okay, you wear your rings out over time, what happens? Yeah, so the balance goes out, and you have to keep up on it. When the engine's together, you'll do a dynamic balance on it, and that's good, as long as the engine stays in that state. So it's not going to help you much insofar as down the road, but it will run like a kitten as soon as you balance it. Now, there was a guy, I don't know if I told you about him or not. He's got an AD note on it. He was a stock car guy, right, out of North Carolina. And so he had a machine shop, and he did some work for his brother, who was some stock car ace guy. And what he did was he would balance aircraft crankshafts. So not all the time would he have enough work, so he'd take aircraft engines in, do some balancing on them. So if it was a little light in the spot, what he'd do is he'd weld a piece of steel on the crankshaft. Right? What would that do to the heat treat on the crankshaft?
Destroy it.
It would screw it up, yeah. And what happens is, because the crankshaft is rotating and vibrating, it puts a bunch of little cracks, stretch cracks into it, because anytime you hit it with a lot of heat in one spot, you don't even have a heat affected zone. How many of you had Paul's welding class? Okay, well, I'll tell you this. Right alongside the weld, there is what they call a heat affected zone. And it's very narrow. Let me show you here. And this is something you can see when you look at a weld. They got two pieces of metal, and you got your weld like this. little beads like this, that's enough. But in this zone right here, color it, maybe. In that zone on either side, there is what is called the heat affected zone. And this is an area where the weld can break easily. Heat affected zone. You should write that down if you don't have it already. So this guy was welding, he put a blob of something on the crankshaft to balance it, or he'd grind metal off the crankshaft. What would that do to the strength of the crankshaft? Just being there, polishing the metal off of it. That'd lower the strength of the crankshaft. And when you grind metal without putting any coolant on it, you create surface cracks on it, right in that same zone where you're welding, and those surface cracks will eventually propagate out and cause you a break. It's just that simple. Because the surface of that metal got too hot, everything around it is stone cold, and so you have an expansion and contraction issue in one little area, which is what this heat affected zone is. So most people say, well, you can only gas weld aircraft structures. Paul's next door now, teaching the welding class. No, you don't have to. Just use gas welding, because gas will heat the whole zone, and as it cools, all of that will contract at one speed together. You don't have hot zones and cold zones. And if you have an area that is too cold, maybe you're welding in cold weather, and maybe it's 30 degrees and you hit it with an arc, what happens, that really makes this worse. So what you do is you preheat it with a torch. You can heat it up to a surface temperature of about 80 degrees, and you can start your welding on it. Okay? So that precludes that. So all of these guys are doing some of these kind of things. Well, this guy ended up with an AD note on himself. And anybody, the way the AD note read, was anybody who couldn't prove that this guy didn't work on their crankshaft had to take their engine apart. So you can imagine how well that was taken by the pilots in this country. And you know, they basically told the FAA to go stick it. So the FAA came back and changed the parameters of that. It's not very often a guy has an AD note against him, but there are some. Okay? So these are the kind of things that people will do to enhance the services insofar as the build of the engine goes. This is ways they can make another $50 or $100. So another thing that people do, maybe they have an STC for it, is they flow match the cylinders. Maybe a race car guys. So you know, in the cylinders there's a port, right? And they will match those ports to the intake, whatever kind of intake you have, whether it's an elbow or a pipe or what have you. They'll match those, and that means is you're going to grind material out so that when that air-fuel mixture hits that little lip, it doesn't trip it up and cause a burble. So you get more air-fuel mixture to go through there, through the port in the cylinder, and that way you end up with more horsepower.
Porting and polishing.
Porting and polishing. Right? Well, they found out that polishing isn't almost cracked up to be, but the porting is a good thing because you want a little bit of surface friction. What that does, that breaks up that flow. So people that polish their cylinders, what they'll find is they'll be going along and all of a sudden the engine will go, and it kind of gets your attention, especially because it happens at night all the time. You never notice it during the daytime. You're always out over the desert. And what that is, what they figured out it is the fuel begins to stick to the surface of the inside of the port. And at some point it all comes tearing loose. And when it does, the engine gets a big gob of fuel all at once, and it kind of coughs and gags, and then it continues on again. Okay? So it's not really detrimental, but I'll tell you what, it gets your attention like right now. You know, the nearest light you can see is 10 miles away, and there's nothing but rocks underneath you. So it can be a little frightening. So these are things that they use to enhance your extreme, really cool engine rebuild. But it's not a rebuild. In the logbook, doesn't matter what it says on their advertising. In the logbook, it has to say what? Overhaul. It better darn well say overhaul in the logbook, because that way the FAA agrees on what is being put into this engine. You all understand that? Okay. So these things could be a mixture of new parts. They could be a mixture of FA PMA parts, and it can also be a mixture of overhaul or serviceable limit parts. Make sense? So some big steps between all three of these, and it kind of depends on the overhaul guy and what you're getting. So if you get nothing else, make sure that you know the three terminologies and what goes into these engines. Now, rebuild engines a lot of times will have the latest and greatest updated stuff. So none of you have roller tappets in your engines. Lycoming right now, if the engine case will accept it, will put roller tappets in an older engine to enhance the design of your engine. That's worth about $5,000, but they just put it in all the cases now. It's just what they do, if it will accept it. But they also have some engines they don't even work on anymore. So the narrow deck engines, of which we have a bunch out here, they won't even touch the narrow deck engines anymore. So you send them an engine for overhaul, they throw up their hands and say, well, we can sell you an overhauled wide deck engine, but we can't sell you any more narrow deck engines because they don't support those parts anymore. Those parts kind of ran out and they don't build anymore, and that was about 1974 or 75. So they used up what they had. Still a lot of parts on the shelves out there at the distributors, but they're not going to fool around with these things anymore. Okay, so let's take 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back in. I'm going to show you how to make a logbook entry. Okay, I'm going to write it down on the board for you. So all of your logbook entries should be pretty close to one another. Yeah, cool.
So Lonnie, this 35, that's 38, that's only $3,000.
Well, $3 grand. I don't know about you, but $3 grand's a lot.
Can't eat rich.
No, I mean, compared to what you're dealing with.
Yeah, but what you're getting is all new parts, basically.
Yeah, but I'm saying, that's no brainer.
Yeah, it really is. That's why a lot of people, that's why a lot of people go that.
If you get up to that side, you might as well go
And that's why the price is that way. Because they want you to take that next step. They'll sell you an overhauled engine. They're happy to do that too. They're ready to.
one night for 3K.
Alright, wait, you won 3K for
No, it's just like one night for 3K.
I think Lycoming could probably make more selling overhaul business than we are.
I'm like, damn, you really be doing.
Because they don't have to pay for casting of new cases and stuff.
That's why they sell the rebuild a little bit cheaper. Because they're still making that same exact, if not more, profit.
Yeah, that's what I said, I think they would probably make more. Because they're still charging a pretty high price, $30,000. And they're saving themselves a lot.
Nobody's here. School's gotta pay their internet bill, man. This is crazy.
I don't want to pay the bills.
Fucking assholes. $46 credit line.
They don't, well, fucking, we own all those, settlement oxygen tanks out there, but we're still paying them. Because the public school never paid them when we were renting them. Clearly, yeah.
Pay for the tanks.
There's a settlement oxygen tank.
That's weird.
The school never paid the people who rented it from. Well, we were renting them, so when we bought them, now we've got to fucking,
Finish paying them.
we got to actually pay all the fucking admin.
Jeez. Yeah, like, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago? The internet just went to crap every day.
School's got corners. Especially since it's going into the summer.
Cutting corners or cutting the services now?
I mean, that vibration meter thing that we were getting in, we got it. But the manufacturer we were buying it from was giving us $1,000 worth of extra equipment for the turbine. You heard this already, didn't you?
I think so.
But the fucking goddamn pencil head in the accounting said, oh, hey, look, Spruce has it for a little bit less.
$2 less.
And they bought it from Spruce instead of going to the deal that happened out with the manufacturer and lost $1,000 worth of equipment. So now we can't finance the turbine.
Chances of just like separated. Feel like you can help. I feel it. I haven't had a day off in like 2 weeks. I feel it today. I feel it today. I feel it. But like I didn't feel it, like I actually woke up like today. And this morning, like I felt like productive, like yeah. And then around 1, I was just like, I need that.
This is gonna go over the test.
Oh, that's right. Have you done anything in this class in like 3 weeks now? Anything since that. He signed something. You know.
We're doing T-test and final? T-test and final?
It was a I'm good with that.
It's like 3 different distributors, the same seal. It's 80 from one, 60 from the other, and 50. Right. It's crazy. No, not 50, 43.95.
5.
Ready for the drive? Yes, sir.
First time.
I'll be happy to pick up. Beautiful girl. Today's a beautiful girl, right? Beautiful girl. It's true. So, oh yeah. That makes sense. I'll be in there.
Very shortly, but we talked about it more in the commissions. Yeah, because that's the, remember that's just the box that doesn't mean that we can't do anything else. Yeah, in the senator, yeah.
Exactly. Phone. Yeah. So bright.
It's pretty crazy, dude. Look at this shit.
This shit, how it's called?
Look at this fucking shit.
Charger.
It's not tight.
What if you use them?
Okay. Oh. Is it the- I don't even know if they're involved with those things. Wall jacket? Something like that. Damn, I'm just kidding. Remember? Huh? What? I just have to get used to it.
Yeah, both of you guys look way dark. Sitting on, just frying on the bay.
Hey, but it wasn't hot. It's just a reflection of the water. But it was a good day. We both caught well, he almost caught like an 18, 19.
Nice.
Wait for it.
Kind of complex.
Yeah, got that smell. Like we're catching them out there, but it's like we're seeing people keeping them now. keep them like
You
that.
should just stay under the bridge and just so you got the shadow.
That's not the spot, man. That's not the spot. I can't even share it. I can't even tell you about the spot. Oh, it's the spot. That's your ball.
Right.
Did you color?
Next to the basement.
Ooh, chicky.
You can't go past that part.
Yeah, everywhere.
God's
It's
serious.
just frustrating.
Buddy. Oh man,
Yeah,
I
it is.
looked it up and there's a 15 grand.
Are those,
I
are those all Delta? They- Southwest did not ship my luggage on the outgoing flight. Are you gonna get out of here? Alright, who just called me? Huh?
I think I'm just gonna get it from like if I can find the same one on Coles.
Yeah, they forgot to send my luggage on the, put it on the flight.
And I got store prices, so. It's either that. No, wait, no. Bring that back up because that doesn't look like heat. That looks like more like they missed they kind of were testing the paint gun and it just kind of sprayed on kind of. If it was red, I'll be like, oh yeah. See out there in the skip.
Zero time since new, 0 time since rebuilt. Use part, new parts. 0 hour since major overhaul. 0 hour since major overhaul. What's that H stand? 0 hour since major overhaul. Overhaul, yes, major overhaul. Small. So Lonnie, that new engine, 35K, you have to keep your core right?
Yeah.
So this
You can buy it outright for 45.
yeah, but it will cost you 35 plus the core, right?
Plus the core, you ship them the core.
So this 35 right here.
And you don't have to guarantee the core. The core could be a pile of crap.
So this 35 right here, you have the core already. Why don't you just get a new one for the same price?
This one you have to have a core for this one too. And of course, to overhaul an engine, you're gonna have to have a core. You'll never see the core that you send back for this one. You'll never see it again. There'll be a whole different cat. You might be a couple parts in there unbeknownst to you.
So what is the message that you're telling us?
What I'm telling you is,
Do a rebuild, right?
well, a rebuild's probably better value for your money if you can afford it. If you don't wanna spend the money, you have options here with the overhauls. Does that make sense?
Make sure you have the right place to do your overhaul.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those around.
It'll work.
Okay, so you rebuilt the engine, or overhauled the engine. And, what do you write for a logbook entry?
Overhaul engine?
It's really, a whole lot easier than you might think. Really a whole lot easier than you might think. Now, there's some other things you can do to kind of doll it up, if you want, but you don't have to. So there's some things they say when you write a news story. You have to write who, what, when, where, and why. But we don't need to know why, because there's some reason you overhauled the engine, right? So you have to have who, what, when, and where. Who did the work? Sandoval did the work. When did he do it? It's gonna date it. What did you do to the engine? Pretty easy so far, right? Who, what, when, where? Where? So what shop did it? You have a shop? Maybe not. What did you do to it? Did you send parts out? Where did they go? Okay. So a lot of shops, auto overhaul shops, are able to do all the machine work themselves. And so we're just gonna launch off here. And you guys are welcome to write this down if you like. And your entry should look something like this. Okay, so you're gonna put the date on it. I'll use today's date. So you're gonna date it. So you have to know when this was done. So the engine is done, you put it through the test cell, or maybe not, but you've got the engine ready to ship, paperwork's all done. This is the last entry in the book. Okay, what did you do? Overhaul. Lycoming. O360. Another one of these. This one's kind of crooked here. A1A. There's your model, but we need a serial number. Now, some of you don't have data plates, and that's okay, just make up a number for it. So it's gonna be a series of, usually it's an L number, with a bunch of numbers after that. Okay, that's a serial number. So that says what you did to this thing here. Pretty easy, right, so far? Doesn't get any harder than this. Okay. In accordance with. So you have your authority. What's your authority for overhauling the engine?
Manufacturer.
What's that?
Manufacturer. Manual.
Overhaul manual, right?
Overhaul manual.
Sure. In accordance with overhaul manual. And then you're gonna have a part number on it, right? So I remember that those manuals have a part number on them, right? Have you seen those part numbers? Yeah, if you look, you'll find them. So somebody comes along behind you and said, what did he use for authority here? They go straight to that manual. And if you didn't do it according to the manual, they're gonna figure it out. So you don't just put it on there if you didn't do it. Okay. And what else? What's your other authority? What other book are you using out there? What is it?
42%.
Parts manual. Parts manual you're gonna use, right? The IPC, parts catalog, whatever you wanna call it. So we're gonna have, Lycoming parts catalog. And then it's gonna have a part number on it. All these manuals have a part number. What this does, this ties what you've done to the book. Let's put the part number on there, the X's. Okay, so this is what you did, you overhauled the engine, used the parts manual, and you used the maintenance manual, used everything in there. So it's kind of the short of it. Now, when you overhaul an engine, you should take care of all the AD notes and service bulletins. Now you have to do the service bulletins?
No.
No. So what you have to do then, in this case, you don't do the service bulletins, you just put on there all ADs, or AD notes. Complied with. To date of overhaul. Okay, and if you want to add the service bulletins in there, the line is just the same except it's your SP. Okay. What that says is this is a nice fresh engine. It's got all the latest and greatest stuff in it. There are no AD notes on this. Now, once you put it in the back of the guy's pickup truck and he takes it away, all bets are off. Because you've done everything that was necessary up to that point. Does that seem simple enough? That's all you have to put in there. And then you're going to who did it? What, when, where, who? And so we use, so we should use ed quad. So Ed has an A and P license, right? A and P, and then the part his number after that, your certificate number, right? But you've already dated this, so that's already understood. You don't have to date the bottom of it. Was that easy enough?
What about total engine times?
Well, that'll go on there too, getting to that part. So that was easy enough, right?
Mhm.
Okay, now we're gonna put on there, what'd you do? Okay, so, so back over here, you're gonna put, let's see, where we at? Now we can put it in here. So, so we've got, 0 hours. Since major overhaul, SMOH, 0 hours since major overhaul. And say it's 2,000 hours. Total time. That pretty much explains the whole picture, right? Pretty easy. That's what you're gonna put in your logbook entry for your engine. Now, you should also include a bill of material for your engines. What did you throw away? What was rejected? So look in the paperwork that you've done. Figure out what pieces you've gotten rid of. And then what I want you to do is if you get rid of them, I want you to find out what the parts cost that you're gonna put back in there. Okay? So if you buy a cylinder, and the easy way to do that is just go to Aircraft Spruce, look in there, type in a number and see what they get for it. It's just real easy to do. Okay, everybody okay with that? That's all the basic line, that's all you have to put in there. It seems pretty easy for all the work that you just did, but really, you know, if I saw that, I'd kind of be thinking, man, that guy was in a hurry.
What's SM?
Because there's some other stuff in there that really needs to
Zero
go
L
in
since
there,
major.
but doesn't have to go in there. Okay. So if you replace the cylinders, you might want to make another little addendum there under between Ed Quock and the text. You want to write in there, what do you got?
Sorry, it says ED, okay, I don't understand.
It's Ed, that's his
That's
name.
it. That's him.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
It's his signature.
Send you the bill.
Send me the money. Don't send me the bill. So, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna add that information in there between the time and the text. So if you replace the cylinders, right in there, replace the cylinders with part number, blah, 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 whatever the cylinders are. If you had the crankshaft overhauled, just simply write overhauled crankshaft. If you had the camshaft reground the camshaft. All parts were fluorescent penetrant, magnaflux, or dye penetrant inspected. So you have all these different things that could have been done to this engine, but you don't have to put it in there. If you want to just keep it simple, that's all you need. But, you know, the next guy down the road, the owner, when he looks in his logbook, he's gonna go, wow, I paid $24,000 for that, and that's all you write in the logbook? Well, that's just about all you have to write in the logbook.
Hey, wouldn't all that information go in the invoice?
You could do an invoice.
Shouldn't it? I mean,
There's a lot of places don't give you an invoice, so just take the money and stick it in their pocket. It won't necessarily be on the invoice. You're not required to generate an invoice for this stuff. You've got a logbook entry, and that's a legal document right there.
So Lonnie, I'm sorry, the part list and all that goes separately? The part list that you replace stuff, you do that separately or?
Yeah, it's called a bill of material.
So
And
that's an invoice, right?
so-
Bill of material?
No, it's not that. All it says is what you put in the engine. There's no prices on it. I'm gonna have you put prices on it, and so it's gonna turn into that, but you're not gonna get billed off of that. So what I'm gonna have you do is I'm just gonna have you write a parts list, parts you replace, and what those parts cost, because I want you to see what this stuff costs. So you replace cylinders, $1,100.
But when you submit everything to the customer, you give them the part list too, right?
Yeah, and that's super important, because what if that guy goes out of business?
So that's separate, that's outside of the logbook entry,
Yeah,
just
yeah. 'Cause
another piece of.
What happens is you couldn't put all those parts in the logbook. There's not
Yeah,
enough
because
room.
it's so much room.
Yeah, to just fill up the book. So all you're gonna do is, a bill of material supplied to the customer or something like that. Yeah. And that's a smart way to do it. But if you have some work done that's kind of unusual, you don't put every little thing in there. You know, a lot of people try to write too much in a logbook.
So you
Like
get
I
in
strip
trouble.
the paint off, and I clean the engine, and then we measure the engine. These guys will go on and on and on with this stuff. But if you worked according to the maintenance manual,
Yeah.
you've already done that.
And the more you put in, the more you will probably get in trouble if something
Yeah,
happens.
well, there's guys, like I say about the powder coating, guys will spend a half a page on what a cool job of powder coating they did,
At no value.
and that's decoration. Decoration doesn't count. Oh, I was gonna say on powder coating too. Powder coating can be put on too thick, and so, especially lighter colors. And what happens is whites, pale colors, yellows and blues and all that sort of thing. If you get it on too thick, what's it gonna do to the heat on the engine?
Contain.
It's gonna try to contain it. It's gonna act like an insulating blanket. So,
Mm,
if you do use powder coat, you don't put it on very thick.
mm.
Make sure that they understand that. So if they send the cases out for powder coating, they mask it. It's gonna be usually some guy that doesn't know anything about aircraft engines, and he'll
Pass it on.
just put it on till hell won't have it. I mean, it'll be dripping off, right? So you don't want that. It's gotta be done right. If it's not, you can end up with a lot of problems. This is pretty easy, huh?
Yep.
You all get it written down?
Yep.
So, so what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna leave you to your imagination. we're gonna be done here in just a couple minutes. That's all I'm gonna show you tonight. That's all I want you to worry about. So each group is going to, in turn, start your assembly on the engines. I notice some of you have connecting rods on the crankshafts already. Are they torqued? Who was it? Were you just storing them there? Somebody had them on there.
Oh, I have mine on.
Did you torque them?
No.
Are they in
Not
the
yet.
right spot or?
They are in the right spot, they're in the right direction according to the manual. I had to put them on because we forgot to measure, side clearance.
Okay.
So
Right.
that's the only reason
So,
why they're on.
so you're gonna continue from there, and that's okay. What I want you to do is, as you're working on these things, is make sure every stinking step of the way that this engine turns, right? Because your last operation may lock the engine up. And if it locks the engine up, then you got a problem. But if you go 2 or 3 steps down, because you're sailing along, everything's rolling really smooth, you're gonna be in trouble. Because you're not gonna know what the problem is. So Landa's gonna probably show anybody who is ready to put the engine back together tomorrow. We have a video on basically how to do it. Follow the manual too. And the other thing I want you to do is pull up the service bulletin for installation of the thread and the sealant. So Lycoming has a service bulletin. If you just type in Lycoming sealants for engines, boom, this thing will pop right up, be right in front of you. And print yourself a copy because it shows you exactly how to lay the thread in the case. If you lay it the wrong way, it's going to leak, or it won't support the 2 case tabs, right? So you want to keep the thread on the inside of the bolt holes. If you get them on the outside of the bolt holes, it's going to migrate into the bolt hole, and they start to leak around the bolt holes that hold the case tabs together. You don't want that. So pay close attention to that. There's always some engines that start leaking at the bolt holes, and I can almost always bet what they've done insofar as the thread goes. And if you do tear it down, you're going to find that they misrouted the thread around the bolt hole. So oil starts leaking or migrating, and you just got a little mess. You have to clean it up all the time. Okay. So be sure that you look up that service bulletin. Also, I want you to pull up the service bulletin. Every one of your groups, pull that service bulletin up for what you have to replace or should replace in the engine when you overhaul it. You type in overhaul criteria for Lycoming engines, and that one will pop up very, very quickly too. Okay. And so I see 2 of you writing that down. Everybody should be writing that one down. Right. And that'll pop up. So Lycoming service bulletin. And it may not even be a service bulletin, it might be a service letter, SL. Okay, so SBs are service bulletins. They have a little higher level. SLs are how to do things. Continental calls them SIL, service instruction letters, and basically it's how-to stuff. It's a little bit different. They all got that kind of figured out? Pretty simple. Nothing too tricky there. I'd like to see you add something to it. What did you do to the crankshaft? Did you have to grind the crankshaft? Look at your measurements. Are the measurements good, or will it go back in? What's the scoop? Are the clearances good, or are you going to have to overhaul the crankshaft? Would you magnaflux a crankshaft? Magnafluxing a crankshaft is a level 2 or level 3 NDT operation anymore. It used to be every shop did their own NDT, but the FAA doesn't allow that anymore because you're not really able to interpret what you're seeing on the Magnaflux machine. So you have to have a higher level of competency. So NDT people, somebody in here was telling me they wanted to go to school for NDT. Who was that? Yeah, Chris. It's a good thing to do. Every shop needs an NDT person. Big shops got a fleet of them. They got all kind of NDT people, and they get paid a premium. They get some more money for what they do. So if you're doing eddy current, X-ray, you're doing anything you can imagine, NDT, they'll put you to work and have you doing that stuff. It's really important. All right. Anybody? Anything? I know you want to get out of here because I'm going to let you out early. But if you've got a question now, let me know. Yeah.
Do we have a test next week?
We're going to have a test next week. Thank you. Yeah, we'll have a test next week. Yeah. And so, you won't even be allowed to start putting your engine back together until your paperwork is complete. Landon's gonna be coming around auditing it. The only thing that should be open will be a clearance check on the gears in the back, maybe an end plate check on the connecting rods, maybe some couple little things you missed along the way. But you should have that pretty well whipped. This is your next piece. And then after you generate this, build your bill of material and put your prices on it so we can see that you know how much you're gonna have in this thing. Sound pretty good?
Can we go over a little bit of the test stuff or no?
No, we'll do that next week. I'll give you a little review next week. Yeah, if it ain't gonna stick. Got 1 week. So, why don't you all take off and have a nice afternoon, and I'll see you, I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you